part of the reason we're here today is to celebrate the over 30 years of work that Phillip's contributed to students and to teachers across the country. So during this time, Phillip's kept student inquiry key. That's at the heart of BTS, at the core of all of his work. His many accomplishments include being the author of books for educators like the one that you just won, and also 6 children's books. I didn't know that. So he's served as the consulting curator at the Institute of Contemporary Art, and very notably was the director of education at the Museum of Modern Art. And it's during that time where he developed visual thinking strategies, as well as the complementary curriculum and professional development. This, I believe, is your legacy. I think that it's so wide-reaching that this is your legacy, and it's also what brought us all here together today. So, although initially created for museum education, BTS is used in classrooms from pre-K to the university to support students learning the arts, literacy, and across the disciplines. In fact, I find it fascinating that a lot of the most recent research in BTS is in medicine. Schools, colleges of medicine have been using BTS. That's probably the most recent research on that. So personally, I've used BTS in every grade from 1 to 6 in my own classrooms and in my research. I've led BTS lessons with credential students, master's students, and doctoral students studying visual-based research methods. You can see why it's an important strategy in my own pedagogical practice and why I think it's important for us to honor Phillip. Recently, Phillip co-founded the Watershed Collaborative, and you have more information on that in your packet, where he serves as the creative director. This organization builds on the principles underpinning BTS to continue to find new ways to support teacher learning and collaboration through inquiry-based methods. So please help me welcome Phillip and thank him for
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, this is really nice, and I wish I could have heard every breakout, sort of, and so on and so forth. But I will get reports. And I look forward to that. So I thought that maybe I would review some of the history of BTS for those of you who don't know it, but also because I wanted to add to it a little bit. There's some parts of it that are less known than others. But BTS was created in response to a request from the trustees of the Museum of Modern Art, who were being asked every year to fund our programs, if anybody learned from them. And this happened at about the same moment as schools were beginning to sort of be asked that accountability question, sort of, that has plagued life ever since, kind of thing. Do students learn what it is we're teaching? And you know, in the political context that has sort of come up over the last couple of decades, it's sort of, the question is incredibly annoying, because it has led to the tests and so on and so forth that have, I think, been the bane of an awful lot of people's existence, certainly teachers, but mostly, and kids as well. And they haven't done what they were supposed to do. They haven't sort of created this panacea that was hoped for, which is that everybody, in fact, starts out with whatever and then ends up with all of this stuff that makes it so they're ready for higher education and for work and so on. And we haven't seen that happen as a result of the tests, which has been the major invention, those and standards, invention of this era kind of thing. But it's not a terrible question, because when I look back at sort of my own education, I think I wish a little bit more of it had taken. You know, I mean, it's sort of, there are things that I'm not good at, or that I don't think it's because I'm dumb. You know, I think it's really because of how they were taught and how I tried to learn, but it didn't really stick. So, you know, there are vast swaths of math and science and history and things where you know, I would learn it, as I'm sure you did, and maybe pass the test, maybe ace the test, who knows, and then not very many years later, maybe weeks later, you're glad you don't have to take that test anymore. So, so I wasn't really sorry that they were asking the question on the one hand, and on the other, and also, although I wasn't exactly born going to museums, and you know, sort of, my parents were nice people, but my mother liked pretty things. But going to museums wasn't really high on lots of lists. There was no money for travel, and there were, you know, lived in university communities where there were probably museums, but it didn't necessarily. Natural history, yes. But anyway, so I discovered art on my own, kind of thing, and through friends, and and did realize that it was pretty interesting, and but over the course of 20 years, let's say, of sort of confronting works of art and being able to, and being having the opportunity to dig into them, it had changed me. It had produced a sense about art as sort of being something that's incredibly important. And as I began to think more and more about that kind of thing, I realized that sort of almost everything we know about the past has come from the art that has been saved from cultures that valued certain things that they did more than other things, and that somehow they got put in tombs, or they got collected in cabinets of curiosity. One way or another, they made it through time, so that we have what we know, to the extent that we know. Mary Franco, you just made me sort of think about that word. But what we know from the stuff that is left behind, that whether they called it art or not, we do. And we put it in art museums very frequently in order to sort of appreciate it, kind of thing. And Mary Franco's presentation was sort of a lot about sort of the creation of knowledge on the part of children, sort of, and how BTS can kind of connect to that. And but I'm thinking that Egyptian art, so you encounter a pyramid, and lo and behold, the grave robbers of times past didn't take everything out of it, and so you find this treasure trove and this stuff. And so what are they doing when did it come with a label? I mean, there are hieroglyphics that people eventually figured out, sort of, they think, but it's all theory. It's all, it's that we don't know. And so, but scholars have done a lot of looking, a lot of thinking about what it is. They argue in evidence, they look for more, they argue with each other and develop knowledge, kind of thing. And so it's sort of, the whole business of being able to use art the way it was used in times past, to try to figure out how it can become as meaningful in our lives as it once was. And here's how to illustrate that. Art and religion throughout time have had this incredible symbiotic relationship. Most religions had not just visual art, of course, but architecture and music and liturgy and performance, basically, sort of stuff that helped people understand who they were, understand how they could be part of their culture, understood how they progressed through time, how they understood change, whether it was change of seasons or change of people over time, kind of thing, change of status. So the arts were always, before now, really critical in people's lives. And for us to think we can live with putting all the arts in different boxes, not even connecting them, feeling like we need to know something special to be able to connect to them is not right. It's just simply not right. And but who's going to take care of that problem? Who is it who cares about that problem, kind of thing? And museums, in a way, and concert halls and other kinds of venues sort of have more of a sense of why they do what they do than is generally true in the culture, kind of thing. And so if we're not taking on the responsibility to try to connect people to these things that artists continue to make, even if it's a different kind of relationship, as it might have been in a tribal culture or in medieval Europe, it's a different relationship, but nevertheless, we still have artists. They're still making things that are really sort of powerful if you take the time and feel like you can probe them for both the ideas and the information and the feelings that they convey to us. And if so, to me, the question that came, do people learn from what you teach them, became a matter of it's very serious, it's a very serious question. It wasn't just like, it's nice. You know, I want people to sort of, you know, remember what I said. No, it's because if they don't have the capacity to make sense out of what the arts do for us, if they don't have that, if they can't make that connection for themselves on their own, then they're missing something really terrible. And it may be one of the reasons why we are so inhumane to one another. I mean, not to say that people in tribal cultures are always so humane to one another, I don't know, who knows, but, and I think their life for many in ancient Egypt was kind of rough. But, so just because the pharaohs sort of got off easy, but still, we think about sort of progressing through time, and we think about civilization developing, and we think about sort of human culture as if it were developing, as if we were getting better, because we have all these things, these devices, we have all this huge amount of knowledge that people didn't used to have. But are we improving our condition as human beings? Are we in fact communicating with each other in the ways that we really need to? Are we caring about each other in the way we need? Have we developed any kind of sense of common humanity that can carry us through bad times? Do we have the wherewithal within us to sort of cope with the things that go wrong? And so many things do. When you stop and think about the sort of the last 100 years and the number of different kinds of challenges that have come before us that we have to accommodate. How can we look back at things like the Holocaust? But it's how can we look at Syria? You know, how can we tolerate that? How can we not, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like I think the arts teach us how to do it. So for me, the question, even if it was coming from trustees who were being asked to pay for something and were asking for accountability for reasons that had to do with that, and it wasn't just that, for me it resonated as a real question. So when we started trying to find out if in fact anybody learned from the programs they asked us to run for them. And at MoMA you have a kind of a particular problem, because at one point when we were trying to find out what people knew about art, when we thought that was the way of understanding whether they learned from us or not, so what they knew, it's like we found out that their definitions of art weren't big enough to incorporate about half of what was in the museum. That what they would check off as part of the definition of art didn't include, really honestly, way more than half of what the museum showed. So it was a bigger problem than it might have been for the Met, let's say, that had all these 5,000 years of art, different cultures and things like that. If you don't like what's going on in one room, you can just go to the next kind of thing. And you know, sort of whether we know anything about Egypt or not, a lot of us think we do, and we don't have any question when we're looking at stuff. So it doesn't challenge us in the same way that, let's say, a painting that looks like your pet monkey, as some people would think could do. So anyway, people are asking for information, but it's every museum pretty much. And because they know they need it, because they don't feel that they're self-sufficient in their viewing. And so they wanted help. Well, when we in fact tried to find out if they learned from our programs at MoMA, the news wasn't good. And many of you probably have heard this already, but sort of they didn't learn what we taught them. So that, let's say, you asked a bunch of people to volunteer to be interviewed after they had attended a gallery talk. You got some volunteers. You taped the gallery talk. You kept track of all the work that people saw. And then you reconvened with the people who had volunteered. And you said, so what I'd like you to do is retrace your steps and tell us what you looked at and what you remember from the lecture that you just heard. Well, people didn't even remember the works they saw. And so they couldn't really retrace their steps. And part of that's about, you know, the pathway through the museum and all that sort of stuff. It wasn't, but I mean, again, I'm not trying to criticize the people. It's just that the technique that we were using, our lectures were good, They were, it was New York City at the Museum of Modern Art. I mean, I didn't really have to work too hard to find people who wanted to teach there. And so that people had the credentials, they had the knowledge, they had to be good speakers, and they were funny, and they were smart, and they could make analogies, and they were great performers. But did it stick? No. And to the extent that it did stick, we found out, because Abigail Housen was at this point involved in helping us understand what we were looking at, and I'll come back to her. But it was through the lens of their developmental stage. So Abigail Housen, I'll very quickly say, and many of you probably know this already, sort of was a developmental psychologist who had sort of spent her graduate years at Harvard, and where they were doing a lot of developmental work at a certain particular point. They stopped, and I think it's because of how long it takes to do a doctoral program if you're trying to look at development over time. And so in any case, but Abigail was an older graduate student when she started, and sort of just wasn't in a hurry, and so she took the time it took to sort of collect hundreds of interviews with people and to look at a comparison between the way they thought and how much experience they'd had thinking about art, what kind of, we should call that a museum and art-related biography, sort of if they had ever taken art, if their parents or mate took art, if they collected art, if they habitually went to museums or galleries, or all their there's sort of just a lot of questions about sort of what it is, how you let art impact your life to the extent that it did, and then she had that to compare to the interviews that she did by asking people to look at a work of art. Where are your eyes going? What are you thinking about? Just talk as if you were talking out loud, thinking out loud. I'm going to tape record you. You ready? And if they stopped during their aesthetic developmental interview, as it was called, she would say, uh-huh, or where are your eyes now? But she couldn't say, would you say more about that? Because she didn't want to direct them. She wanted just to get that kind of evidence that sort of would allow her to come with a clean slate and try to figure out what she could learn from the data she was collecting. Hundreds of interviews. Over the course of her doctoral program, she realized that there were 5 different distinct patterns of viewing, and that people with no experience with art thought in a range of thoughts consistently, person after person. There could be outliers. There could be, there was some variation within it, kind of thing. But the fact is that sort of there was a pattern that dominated of 5 or 6, I forget exactly, maybe as many as 7 different thought units, as she could, types of thinking. Over the course of her doctoral, she developed a coding manual, was able to sort of categorize 144 different kinds of thoughts that were distributed among 5 stages. And the first stage, the account of her storytelling stage, had something like 5 or 6 different kinds of thinking that consistently went on. And then when there was a little sort of at some moment there was some kind of change, and there was maybe a little bit of transition, but it's sort of at some point, as a kid goes from crawling to walking and hasn't forgotten how to crawl, but just doesn't do it anymore because there's something better has happened, kind of thing. Sort of people would get into stage 2, and it wasn't as if they'd lost all the behaviors that were possible in stage 1. It's just that they no longer resonated for them in the same way, kind of thing. And so there was another, and then stage 3, and then stage 4, and then finally stage 5, kind of thing. Stage 5, people are almost all old. They've spent their whole life with art. Stage 1 is very typical of kids and people who haven't gone. It's like your mate, the person who you drag to museums. They sort of wouldn't go on their own. They'd rather watch football or something like that. But interview people in the grocery store. Most people are stage 1. But most museum visitors are stage 2. However, most people teaching in museums were stage 3 or above. And so we could be completely charming and articulate and clear with the stage 3 ideas we were sharing. But at stage 2, you could hear it, but you couldn't incorporate it. You couldn't own it. It's as if you were trying to talk about that kid who has just sort of learned how to toddle. You're trying to make it skip. It's not going to happen. And it's the same sort of thing, kind of thing. Is they can appreciate skipping. They can certainly see that their brother or sister does it. It's not like they're insulted, but it's not going to happen. And even if you do get them to jump or something, again, they're not going to repeat that sort of thing. So stage theory, if we had stage theory for more different topics, we could teach a whole lot better. But what we were able to do, taking Hausen's data about how our visitors thought, was create teaching that, number one, asked them to do what they could already do, a great place to begin any kind of educational intervention. I highly recommend it. Start with what they can do. And make the first challenge getting better at that. So let's say beginning viewers can make observations. They just don't make very many. So make them make more. That's a step in the right direction. If the observations they make tend to be rather simple, give them an opportunity to grow within that frame. In other words, they make observations, but give them an opportunity to make observations that are more detailed. Maybe give them an opportunity to see things in combination. So, make your challenges always within reach. This is straight Vygotsky. You know, sort of what they're on the verge of being able to do is the right step to ask them next. And to continue that process so that they continue to succeed. And then pretty soon they've moved on. And what we found with doing it, to creating BTS, around what beginning viewers did, mostly stage 1 viewers kind of thing, what we found was that they quite quickly proceeded, and I'm talking about like 10 hours of looking, structured through BTS. They became stage 2 viewers. And over the course of several years of elementary school, if they had BTS roughly 10 hours a year for 3 years, they were solidly in stage 2, and some of them had a foot in the later stage. And that was the growth that we had hoped would be happening from our lecturing, our teacher programs, our all sorts of studio-related and other kinds of programs at MoMA, and what wasn't happening. So we shift the teaching, and all of a sudden we can produce the growth. And so we used Abigail Hausen's protocols to find out if in fact aesthetic growth was occurring. But what we found out was that, and yes, it was happening. We could produce aesthetic change. It was only through stage 2, in part because after stage 2, which is like functional literacy reading, after you can read, there's a certain degree to which it's up to the individual to sort of progress beyond that. So you can assign books, you can, but once they know how to read, it's kind of their game. And if they like to read, they will read. And if they don't like to read, or don't like to read what you give them in school, they may or may not sort of progress on their own. But the fact is that sort of it's that point where you're making choices. So at the end of stage 2, you're ready to take it on. You know how to read. You're empowered. You're self-sufficient. So, and if you want to go on, you might study art history. You might become an artist. You might collect. You might spend your life, sort of. So, but it's by choice, pretty much beyond that. Or it's a different kind of learning, a more formal kind of learning. For example, many people learn art history in the academy, because it's sort of a great place to learn it. It's organized, it's presented sequentially, you're given all kinds of resources that sort of help you do that kind of thing. So it's where but if you don't have that foundation in a solid stage 2, then the experience of college and university sort of style teaching isn't going to stick. Is that making any sense? Is there any resonance with that? Did it happen to anybody here? Things not sticking? And so it's sort of, so what we've not done in too many subjects is prepared people through that stage 2 period where they become empowered, and so that they can then operate on their own with your help in a variety of different ways. Well, as I sort of said in my little PowerPoint over here, sort of that's where the real adventure began, because just like today, where I could only go to one breakout session, so I was sitting in Mary Franco's, and I learned about BTS from her, from the work that she's been doing to study it, kind of thing. So, I'm not going to necessarily try to tell you exactly all I learned today, but that's been the process of this. So we created lessons, and we watched and tried to pull from our own observations what we could do to change, but we were so greatly enriched by people telling us what they saw happening, and by us then maybe trying to find out if enough people reported that they thought the kids were in fact using thinking skills that they were picking up during the VTS lesson and other lessons. Were they? Was that true? And so, 3 years of research on that to answer that question, kind of thing. It sort of became part of our process. But what we at some point, lacking research funds, sort of one thing and another, we stopped trying to do research in the pure sense. But that said, people are doing it all the time. You are, and thank goodness you are. And it's all for us all to learn. Someone will do a better VTS one of these years, because it'll just happen. But anyway, what we found out through watching on our own and through being told what teachers and others observed was that the meaning making that goes on when you become a more visually literate person, let's say making more observations, making more detailed and more complicated observations, making more observations in combination with other sorts of things so you sort of see things in context, arguing in evidence, kind of thing, that though the arguing, you're making more inferences from your observations, kind of thing, and then arguing those inferences with evidence. Once you got that pattern of thinking down with works of visual art, you can easily apply it in math, it turns out, in science, and so on and so forth. And it turns out that as a strategy for making sense, it does transcend disciplines very easily. Sort of, it's basically could be considered the scientific method too. What's going on here? What do I see that makes me say that? Argue in evidence, and what more can I find? Sort of, science educators are often very concerned these days about the fact that science is taught one way and practiced completely another, and that's not okay. So people aren't prepared for scientific work by their schooling, because people are trying to teach them a body of information that changes all the time, and or they're trying to teach them a bunch of received ideas, as it were, concepts that sort of guide science, where they're all in flux, in truth, in the scientific world. So, the implications for thinking, but what we found out that we didn't know was that when you ask people to discuss things, particularly when they're complicated things that are slightly out of the ordinary, yes, they'll use the language that they have available to them, but they will also stretch to try to spit out an idea that's stuff that doesn't come up in their ordinary discourse. And it seldom comes up in the kinds of questions that teachers ask, which so often have to do with right or wrong answers, kind of thing, rather than theories, ideas, using the knowledge that you have to figure out something new, kind of thing. So, but through a discussion, you can apply language that is more complicated and more interesting and more expressive and involves more different sorts of things. For example, not just information, but ideas, feelings, and so on. Trying to find language. People often say that sort of men either don't have feelings or aren't in touch with them or can't express them. Well, none of those are quite true. But the fact is that sort of we are at a disadvantage in the sense that almost no one ever asked us as we are growing up to express our feelings. Sort of it's happening more and more now. But when I was growing up, come on. And so, of course, you grow up ignorant. You know, sort of, but anyway, sort of the fact is that sort of if we want people to learn to talk, we have to give them an opportunity to, if we want them to learn how to speak, we have to give them an opportunity to talk. If we want them to learn to write, we have to give them a chance to talk, because guess what comes first? Oral language. If we want them to be able to read, if they can't say it, they probably can't read it. If they can't say it with understanding, they probably aren't going to comprehend what it is they're trying to read. So these things are symbiotic, but when you're given a work of art to talk about, so many different levels, so many different layers, so many different kinds of information come to play, that sort of it stretches language kind of thing. And when it's supported by the teacher who's paraphrasing, it's magical. It's the simplest tool you can imagine, and it works in preschool and it works straight through ELL classes. And so we found out that BTS worked with different ages. We started with 4th and 5th graders, but we started with 5th graders. Perfect age for conversation. Didn't think about anybody else. Teachers, on the other hand, who were trying this out, some of them looped. So they also taught 4th grade. They said, can you do a set of lessons for us for 4th grade? Yeah, okay. Sort of. The 3rd grade teachers heard about it. Okay. 2, 1, really? Kindergarten? No, come on. Discussions about art in K? Well, it's in pre-K now, and in a lot of pre-K, and for good reason, because of course they can discuss. But it's interesting, Marva, you were saying something about one of the things that we learned really was that not all pictures are the same, and that the images that are really, really great in preschool aren't the same as the ones that you need in middle school or high school. I used to think that all art images were the same in a way. You know, it was different from how literature worked, where you had to start with Dick and Jane or something like that. But the fact is that it's much easier if you start with certain kinds of pictures for beginning viewers and then progress beyond that, as people develop more and more different strategies for making sense of what it is they're looking at. But we found out that BTS could work through different sorts of ages, up and down from where we were talking. That it affected teachers, that it wasn't just the kids that were growing from it, that teachers grew. They didn't necessarily grow aesthetically in the same way. If you're not doing your own looking, you may or may not grow aesthetically. But what you may do through a teaching strategy that is different from what's going on most of the time in classes is develop a commitment to a simpler set of questions, and to start questioning the right or wrong for all kids at all times, and start wondering about more things that could be explored. So it can affect teachers and teaching kind of thing. We found out that different kinds of audiences would respond differently, but the fact is that you could deal with them. So this is where medicine came in, where college and university work. We have a fairly robust program that a couple of people are doing in business, where BTS is taught to try to develop soft leadership skills, facilitation instead of directing and whoops, and then also where it can be where you can get everybody's voice heard, and where the people who want to hang back can participate kind of thing, because you level the playing field. But probably the most interesting thing that we've learned is that the strategy of making sense out of things by trying to figure out what's going on is basically, and then arguing in evidence, and then thinking about it more, reflecting on it, is learning how to learn. And one of the things that BTS has been useful for is running across the curriculum. What's going on in this math problem? what's going on here when looking at an aquarium with a certain age group, or with scientific images that come from some other source. And so that's been kind of an exciting thing, is to sort of think that there's a basic strategy for learning how to learn here that can be instituted as early as preschool and then reignited as late as graduate school if in fact it's needed. Well, some people tell us that it might be. That there are people who are teaching in higher ed who complain about the fact that their students are unwilling to participate and speak up and take chances. They don't have the kind of thinking skills that people want them to have, expect them to have, that they're promised, that they don't necessarily know how to express their ideas clearly, whether it's orally or in writing, and that they don't easily work together, kind of thing. And guess what? All the work of tomorrow is going to be done by collectives. We have to be able to talk to one another. We have to be able to figure it out. Just look at the world today and how it cannot be solved unless people are talking, unless they're effectively talking with each other and learning how to share and to move from where we are, maybe stuck, to another place, kind of thing. But it's not just in academia, it's in the world of work, where all of those same problems exist, where people won't speak up, where they don't know how to think, where they can't express themselves in any way, kind of thing, but their critical thinking skills are not admired consistently, kind of thing. Collaboration is still a problem, expressive abilities, all of those things are a problem in the business world, but also illiteracies that have to do with being able to read text and image in a way that can allow you to sort of to explore new things, which is what the world is about at this point. It's so much new stuff that's happening. It's sort of inventing something new. It's trying to figure out, it's like, I don't know, have you heard about blockchain technology? Well, it exists. It's something that's sort of, it's a different kind of software for keeping track of things. It'll probably be the lingua franca, Mary's middle name kind of thing, of the web world, very shortly, but it's about how you can keep track of information flow, basically. That's what the chains are about, sort of where something starts and where it goes and who uses it, sort of whether, so it's the intelligence behind Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, where the value of them is only established by who buys it, who believes it's real. And so you have blockchain technology sort of can track this, somebody bought it over here, kind of thing, and then they used for it to pay over here. There's one kind of transaction you can watch. Oh, I guess maybe I'll buy some Bitcoin and then use it to do this, and then it is as this builds, it develops a credibility, kind of thing. You know, sort of our money, by the way, is no longer based on silver or gold, as you perhaps have been told in school, kind of thing. It's based on the word of the government that we will make good on that dollar. And so it's sort of, and then we have the government that we have in, well, in any case, but trying to figure out how to work in a new environment like that requires, like blockchain, requires thinking skills that go beyond being able to do what you already could do or received information. It's about like, oh, what is this? How can I understand it? How can I explain it to anybody else? How can I explain it to myself well enough to be able to use it? How can I change it to make it better? How can I change it to adapt it to sort of what I'm trying to do? So, being illiterate at any level is a terrible problem to fixing the world. You know, and sort of, I'm 75 years old, sort of, and I look at sort of my generation, the one that came before me, with this almost shame at this point, thinking of the number of problems that we've created for the world, but been unwilling or unable, or both, to fix. So whether it's, you know, just allowing the climate thing to happen when we were warned a long time ago that it was going on. I mean, Silent Spring came out in 1958, I think, or 7. And so, you know, that's a long time ago for us to have been concerned about sort of things, and certain things have happened, but not enough, kind of thing. So there's so many problems, whether it's violence, whether it's use of war when it doesn't work, whether it's education. We're turning over an education system to you to fix with no game plan. So what's it going to be? And so the challenge in education is to try to sort of put people in a position to fix these things that haven't been fixed. And knowing how to learn is sort of at the key of it, at the center of it. Now, BTS has become kind of this thing. It's around, people are using it, and it's great, and it's very exciting, and it is a wonderful thing to have had something to do with it. And that's the way I would put it. I had something to do with it, kind of thing. You know, it wasn't the small thing, but the fact is that sort of it's other people who have made it magic. So I'm going to put you to work. So what I want you to do is to look at this for a moment in silence. Step number 1 in BTS teaching is choose an image for your audience. Step number 2, ask people to look at it. Present it in such a way that they can see it. What do you think's going on in this picture? Yes?
The paint by number self-portrait.
So what did you see that made you say paint by numbers?
The canvas behind her with the shapes, and then what I think, I can't see that far, are numbers inside the shapes.
Okay, so there's the pattern that's used in paint by numbers kits, where you have an outline and a number in it, and it's assigned to a color. Okay, so a paint by numbers. And what did you see that made you say self-portrait?
I believe that the image she is painting is a reflection or a shadow image of herself, with that hair where you're pointing and the pointy stuff up there. And there's more to it also, because I'm not sure what the green is outside. So it's an enhanced version of wherever she is currently.
All right, good. So she is this figure who's sitting in the middle.
She's the artist. She is.
What did you see that made you say that?
She is holding an artist's tool, 2 artist's tools, a palette and a paintbrush, and there's paint on the palette, and she has been mixing colors. They're blended together in different ways.
All right, great. So you've identified the person here, and you sort of say that she's an artist because of the tools of the trade, kind of thing. And you sort of said that it seems like she might even be mixing colors on this palette, because you can see some of them being blended together, kind of thing. And you're thinking that sort of that she's maybe at work on a paint by numbers thing that's behind her. Good. What more can you find?
Purposely black so that we could see the different colors behind that really stand out, not only on the paint by numbers backdrop, but also the paint tray.
The palette.
Sorry.
All right, good. So all right. So you're noticing that she is black, and that sort of that makes her stand out from the background. And you thought that may be a device to help this create a contrast, kind of thing. But also it sort of helps her stand as distinct from this palette and the colors that are on that. Okay, good. What more can you find? Yes.
I noticed the black on the palette is dripping off, it appears, and I'm wondering if she did that on purpose, as if she's not going to use it. That's what I take.
All right, so what you're saying here looks to you like paint that's dripping off this, and you're sort of wondering about that kind of thing. But I heard some mumbling.
It looks like it's her hand, her left hand, holding the palette.
Okay, so another possibility for reading that would be from a distance at the back, it might look like there was paint sort of running off the palette, but it also, when you look up closer, it sort of seems like it's as if her hand is holding, that's how her hand is holding onto that palette. Okay, so, but you're noticing that sort of there is this black thing that sort of dominates this lower part of the palette. Okay, good. What more can we find? Yes?
The scale of objects within the photo is really interesting. Like, she's holding a really big paint palette. I don't ever think I've seen a paint palette quite that big. Like, in comparison to her, it seems like it's like the same size and almost shape as her.
All right, so a kind of a juxtaposition that seems odd, sort of scale-wise, that this seems so huge and outsized by comparison to her and to anything else in the picture. Okay, good. What more can you find? Yes, Jean, you were?
I was going to comment on that absurdly large palette too. It's just
Did she steal your idea? Is that?
darn it. But I also was just going to say I was noticing the pattern in her shirt kind of mirrors that in the background with the paint by number, but her shirt is entirely abstract, but it seems like an extension of her painting.
What did you see that made you say that? That connecting the two, but the pattern here with the pattern there?
Well, I see this linear element and then blocks of color, and it has more naturalistic modeling on it than paint by number, which flattens things out in such a way. But there's a conversation between the two.
All right, good. So noticing that there seems to be sort of pattern relationships and sort of shape relationships and color relationships between what she's wearing and what's back here kind of thing. But you're sort of giving this a slightly more realistic, you're seeing it as more realistic than paint by numbers flatness.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What more can we find? Yes.
The thing that's interesting about the reading that it's a self-portrait is that usually when you do a paint by number, somebody else has created the image and you were just filling in the color. So I was trying to figure out, why is she facing us, looking away from her painting? Who is she looking at? Has she been interrupted? She doesn't look entirely happy. So I was trying to figure out, who is it that she's looking at? And does it have something to do with the person who created the image that she is trying to fill in, or not?
All right, so noticing, just thinking about sort of how paint by numbers usually works. Sort of someone has, you buy a paint by numbers canvas, someone else created the image kind of sort of thing, and it wouldn't necessarily be you. So here she is sitting with her back to something, so you're wondering about sort of what her relationship is to whoever she's looking at, and to them in terms of, let's say, creating a weird story here. Mm-hmm. Trying to figure out a weird story here.
At a mirror. Maybe she's turning around and looking at a mirror, looking at herself so that she can create her paint by numbers portrait.
All right, so you're thinking about her as the creator of the paint by numbers thing, but okay, what more can we find?
And I would say that there's just this sense of huge awkwardness. Here's this hand down here trying to hold that palette. I'm trying to figure out how her arm can be that long and her wrist twist that way. And as an artist, I'd stick my thumb through that hole. So she doesn't really look like she knows what she's doing. In the sense that the palette is huge, and as a kid who loved to do paint by number, it was totally not really creative at all. I remember my father at one point telling me it was okay to blend things together. It's awkward to do somebody else's work like that. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but I would say there's this level of awkwardness about the whole painting.
All right, so there's even physical awkwardness. You're sort of thinking, there's a psychological awkwardness in the sense of using a paint by numbers sort of thing, and you're thinking about your own history of sort of your dad saying, you know.
Kids will do that. They'll tell you about that.
Yeah, but thinking that sort of that hand, not only is it awkward in a position-wise, but you're not even sure that anybody would hold a palette like that anyway. So you're wondering if she's what's this about. So so there's been a number of questions, and I didn't even sort of talk about sort of how someone had mentioned the expression on her face as sort of being kind of interesting in itself, kind of thing. What more can we find? Yes.
I think what's going on is she's breaking the rules.
And what did you see that made you say that?
Well, because usually paint by numbers, they give you realistic colors to follow. And we can see that she's done, if she is in fact the painter, she's done her hair in orange and red, when her expectation would be that it would be black. And so even though it's a paint by numbers where you follow the rules, she has this kind of look like, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not going to.
So you're sort of noticing like that an expectation with paint by numbers that you're going to do it right, and so it comes with the right color, and
she's in the lines, but she's doing it wrong.
but she's just not going to follow those rules. At least the color one. She may stay in the lines,
Right.
but she's not going to follow the color rules. Okay, good. So you're wondering about sort of a role of rebel kind of thing, and that kind of came up with an earlier comment too. Sort of. So, yes, sir. What more can we
With
find?
the oversized palette that several people mentioned, awkward hands on the palette, even the way she's holding the brush, it's to me as if she's not even really the painter at all, but she's the subject of a portrait, and she's posed with this paint by numbers behind her.
So maybe building on the sort of ideas about sort of how awkward it is to sort of watch this and sort of the other kinds of discrepancies, sort of wondering, okay, we were been operating as if she were the painter, that she's been working on this painting behind her kind of thing, that she's using the palettes or the mixed color, whatever. You're not sure. You think that maybe she's just simply posed there. She's the model of a painter, but not truly a painter. So wondering about that. Okay, good. What more can we find?
I had a similar thought to 2 speakers ago, who around. I mean, my feeling was around a tension that I felt with the colors, where, like the idea that someone first shared about the idea that the black paint was running off the palette, and maybe it's her hand, but. Either way, there is no dark colors on the palette, and I can see that she's painted in whoever has painted in the spots that look like her hair with red, and it makes me think, well, if it's a self-portrait or a portrait of a person, you know, what color will the skin be? Because this woman's hair is the same color as her skin, so would she paint the skin red as well? And I also kind of noticed that in general, her skin color is sort of not super skin toned. It's a bit more one-dimensional than skin tones usually are. So even though she's sort of the realistic part of the image versus the painting behind her, something about her doesn't look fully realistic.
All right, good. So a couple of different avenues of thinking, sort of aside from maybe thinking that this had something to do with black paint, and then realizing that maybe it was a hand that was holding this kind of thing. You're noticing that there is no black paint on the canvas, on the palette kind of thing. And that may have something, may connect to the fact that sort of the different colors are used in her hair, when you would expect that she would be able to, but there's no black paint for her to use to paint her hair. So you're really wondering sort of what's going to happen here? How is this going to proceed? What color will her skin be? Raising questions, so finding more things to question about the logic in here. So we have one more over here, and then we'll come back over to you.
What I'm struck by is just how everything around her is highly geometric. Her chair on the bottom right-hand corner of the table, and you know the lines are hard. Like the palette is rounded, but it's still a hard line. And then when you look at her clothing, her skirt and her shirt are just like very organic and flowy. So I see that contrast.
All right, so there's partly there is a rigid geometry that sort of we're looking at, in parts of it kind of thing, and other parts that seem sort of organic and more, I might just add, some of the things on the palette are sort of that kind of amorphous sort of shape that sort of has the organic quality sort of to it. Okay, good. What more can we find? You were trying to say something?
Yeah, because I'm a photographer, I think about the light in this, and I see almost a reflection on her forehead, like a flash. And I've lit dark skin before, so I know that oftentimes you get that reflection if the skin is like oily. And then you can almost see the outline of her shadow also, so there's kind of like a light coming high.
What do you mean? Is
like you can see the outline of her shadow on the painting actually.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then also the outline of her arm on the inside of her shirt. So to me, when I see that, I wonder if this is a photo of a painting of a photograph, maybe a self-portrait with a timer, because I think like a lot of those details make me think that it's not something that's planned, right? Like if you have a shadow in a photo, if you have a reflection on the skin, those things to me feel spontaneous. They don't feel like you're actually like cultivating those out of the photo, like making the adjustments that you would need to have an image that wouldn't have those consequences?
So, sort of, in other words, sort of thinking about this to your own photographic practice kind of thing, and having photographed black skin, you're sort of interested in the whole notion of sort of how things can show up in the photograph that you didn't plan for in the photograph, but you discover as a result of what photography might do, and how lighting might also sort of create reflections on skin that you weren't trying to have, but the camera sees them, kind of thing, and sort of wondering about that, and also noticing that the shadow, and sort of as part of your discussion about part of a theory you were developing about sort of whether or not this could have been based on a photograph, with certain things that were discovered as a result of taking the picture, like a shadow that you didn't really expect to have there, kind of thing. What more can we find? You had an idea.
Assuming that she's the subject and not the artist in the painting, I'm just curious about whose decision it was to paint those colors, like in the hair, using red and orange in the hair, whose decision it was. If it was hers or the artist's personal decision to come up with the choice of colors. And on a side note, the colors here, where you normally don't see red in the hair, it's just very, it reminds me of the Fauvist movement.
All right, good. So if for those of you who don't know, sort of want to tell you anything more about Fauves?
They didn't use colors realistically. It was very expressive.
And the word fauve in French, I think, means beast,
wild beast.
Mm-hmm. So it's sort of in French, rather. It's a notion of the painters sort of being really expressive in a hostile, almost, aggressive sort of way. Not hostile, but aggressive. But sort of wondering, okay, so wondering who is this the person? Is this this has come up before? Sort of wondering about who she is, whether she's the painter here or whether she's the subject here. Is someone else the artist of this? It's sort of who made the decisions? This person that we're looking at here and kind of getting to know? So did she make that decision to paint all that stuff red? Or did another artist who made this make those decisions? Okay, good. Couple more thoughts.
I'm just seeing an abundance of pink and kind of beige and what would be light skin tones on her palette. So, we see the absence of black on her palette, but we also see an abundance of what would be like shades of skin that you would use if you were depicting a white subject. So I'm wondering if that has something to do with the fact that, as Karen pointed out, there's a certain rebellion in what she's painting. And I'm wondering if it has something to do with aesthetics of beauty and what is and is not represented. And I don't know. That may be far-fetched, but that's just what
far-fetched. Is anything far-fetched? Is there a rule that you can't be far-fetched? It's sort of, but you said a lot of things, really. Sort of, it's kind of complicated, but just sort of thinking about sort of this notion of the fact that sort of she's black. But there is, not only is there not black on the palette, but there's an awful lot of pink. The kinds of colors that are sort of, in a paint by numbers thing, you might expect to be the colors of white skin. So you're sort of wondering about that, sort of the nature, in a way, of sort of the motives. The word rebel, you quoted your friend over across the room, kind of thing, of the rebel notion, sort of that there's something that's under revolt here, kind of thing. And so, and wondering now, maybe if it has something to do with race.
And I'm sorry, just to add to that too, another thing I'm seeing is all the primary colors. And I think of when I go to a restaurant with my son and he's trying to do skin color. And there is nothing that represents his skin color or really anybody's. So he just does random colors. So he does blue skin and red hair and things like that because there are no colors that actually represent what he's trying to represent.
All right, so in fact, the problem that a painter has in trying to sort of create color for skin is a complex one, kind of thing, and it's sort of there are no colors that really automatically describe it, kind of thing. You're going to have a problem with it. So if you use the canned colors that things come with, you're going to be disappointed in the reality of the realness of what it is you're sort of producing. Yes.
Based on what I know about this painter, Harry James Marshall, he was really interested in the history of painting, Western painting, and you see in this picture 3 really different modes. You see the historical portrait painting as represented in the face and the woman. You see total abstraction on the palette, and also maybe in her shirt, and then paint by numbers. And it's almost like a history of painting genres, and just seeing how he's doing that all in one picture.
What did you see that made you bring up an artist's name, Kerry James Marshall?
Well, I have seen this work in an exhibition of his work before.
All right, good. So identifying this as the work of a particular artist kind of thing. And who, Kerry James Marshall, is male or female?
Male.
So sort of that answers some kinds of questions that we were wondering about the authorship here, sort of thing. But sort of, so okay, you're saying that this is painted by a man that you recognize from having seen this work in a show of his work. But you're thinking that because you know something about him and that he's interested in the history of painting, you're sort of thinking, okay, so here we have abstraction, here we have, you know, sort of classical realism, and here we have another kind of depiction that's sort of more basic than, yeah, maybe commercial art or something like that sort of thing. So that there's an awareness of different visual systems that sort of work. Okay.
If that is a paint by number, it suggests to me that it was that image of her was created for her by another, not by herself, because we don't tend to make paint by numbers for ourselves. And if that's the case, it appears that it makes me wonder, is she using unrealistic coloring because it's a choice, or unrealistic color because she hasn't been provided with what she needed to paint herself as she is? And then the idea of the art historical, if this is a representation of art history, maybe is it making a statement about art history not providing a place or providing a creative space or for Black artists, you know?
All right, good. So we've kind of been dancing around race here a little bit, sort of, but we're now hitting it sort of square on. Then we're sort of thinking that sort of number one, paint by numbers, it's ironic that this seems to have the picture of the person we're looking at kind of thing. Because if she is the painter of this thing, it's not the usual practice with regard to paint by numbers. So it's sort of about that. She also is sort of, she's limited to the tools that she has, and she's sort of seems to be using them, but sort of it seems, is it conscious that
there's a lot of peach tones there, and if that's what she was given,
what does that say metaphorically?
The expression on her face could be answered by, this is what I was given, but it doesn't represent, I can't represent myself as I am.
So what did you see about her face that sort of is?
The very, just sort of the deadness in her eyes. That I don't know that it's anger, it's just a kind of a resolve. There's pursed lips almost, or her lips look firm, they don't look relaxed. It looks like she's got kind of a very intentional and even maybe confrontational appearance on her face.
All right, so wondering if she's not processing the emotions that have to do with sort of how difficult it would be to create a portrait of herself, given that palette. And sort of thinking in a way about sort of how there may not have been room in the way art history is taught. There may not be literally any room for her to depict herself in this painting, the colors that she actually is, because the color isn't there. Sort of thinking about how that history, in addition to art history, is maybe represented here. I think. Well, I think, okay, there's another idea, maybe two.
I just keep thinking about the colors of not only her, but the background and her chair, and everything just seems a little dark, or like not very colorful versus what she's actually painting. And I feel like that kind of goes along with what she's been provided and like what's in actuality for her and like her environment versus like what she's given to make of it.
All right, so noticing that there's another kind of contrast with sort of the background, sort of, it's very muted tones, and in fact, it's sort of here, it's really quite dark, black maybe, modeled. I don't know if you can see that, but the fact is that what she's painting is sort of more colorful kind of thing, sort of whether, it could be a practical thing about what colors is there kind of thing, but you're wondering, but that raised a question for you, sort of, it's like, what, is she's not given the tools to paint even the world she's in, much less herself. Is that it? Okay, great. What more can we find? Yes.
And with that thought, I think it helps explain why the palette's so massive. And from this distance, and so far away, it's almost as though, here I didn't see it as much, but now I have a distance, which is great with art, because you can step back and see it differently. It's almost as though her body has shrunk within her shirt, too. The shirt is big. And it's as though she is a little bit shrunken within this.
It's sort of thinking more in a way about sort of how it must feel, but sort of thinking that this might have, you know, that using this oversized palette to think about the painting issues that we've been sort of bringing up kind of thing, but sort of noticing that it's not the only thing that seems to be oversized. Her outfit seems like it's not quite form-fitting either, that maybe she's small for it. So thinking that maybe that she's shrunk from the experience of trying, of dealing with the problem that she's got, of not being able to, as you were saying, paint either her environment or herself, given the palette that's provided.
I just got excited because one of the first things I noticed at the beginning of the discussion was that there's like a tan color in the top left part of the paint by number, and I was wondering why I didn't see that on the palette anywhere. And so I was trying to look at the colors that are already on the paint by number and finding them on the palette, and feeling like I don't see a lot of them exactly there. And I just kind of started to think that where I see her brush right now is by the white paint next to the pink paint. And I'm wondering, did she make all that peach color? And I'm seeing underneath some of those peach blotches darker colors that appear to have been painted over, and I wonder if she's been mixing those tones. And it wasn't something that was just handed to her.
All right, so giving some power back to her. Sort of, we've been talking as if she were somehow not powerful in this kind of thing, sort of wondering, but that sort of thinking about the fact that there are these colors here, they seem to be very strong kind of thing, but they're not necessarily altogether represented here. So it wasn't as if she was dipping her paint in a brush in some paint that we can find and then going right up there kind of thing. But then you begin to looking, in fact, this is almost where you started, sort of looking at this palette and sort of seeing that it's complicated, that there are other colors sort of underneath kind of thing. So you're wondering who it is responsible for all those pink blotches and this big white blotch. She's the one who's holding the brush. So sort of agency under question here. Like who does done what to whom? And how are we feeling about it and whatever. Okay, class. Great job. That was really great. Now, think about this. That's BTS. And I noticed that sort of when I was doing it kind of thing, I tried to stick with what you were saying kind of thing. And I had stuck to only 3 questions. What's going on here, which I asked at the beginning and only once. And then what more can we find to keep the conversation going? And then when it was required, which wasn't very often really, what did you see that made you say that? To ask for the evidence to back up certain kinds of things, sort of thing. I didn't need to ask the question very often because why? You supplied your reasons. So you don't ask a question to people who are doing the task you want them to do already anyway. So, oops. I was warned about that, and of course. All right, so now, I don't know how many of you, all of you teach. Is that right? Just different levels? Or not? If some of you are students, would that also be true? But anyway, are some of you both? Could your students do this? With this picture? That's fantastic, because this is one tough picture, it seems to me. And I wouldn't use it with for people who are brand new to looking. Why? Think about the issues that you were bringing up with regard to it. Representation, history, whether it's a history, the quick history of knowing, as you did, and starting us off kind of thing, that's a paint by numbers strategy that we were looking at kind of thing. And then thinking about the other sorts of things. And sort of, not everybody was comfortable with the word palette, but other people had that sort of thing.
I like that the moment I used the incorrect vocabulary, used that as an opportunity to correct me or to give me that vocabulary.
Wasn't correcting you. You knew what you were talking about. You just didn't have the word for it.
Yes.
And that's how paraphrasing works. You help you say what you want to say.
With the correct word.
And do you think that it will stick?
Absolutely.
It's called a context-rich environment for learning vocabulary. You know, it's pretty hard to forget those things that someone's helped you say that you wanted to say. When you had a thing in mind and you just didn't have the word for it, and somebody just sort of supplies it just like that, it's just sort of, okay, great. And that's why BTS works really, really well in ELL situations. Because it's helping, first of all, people are looking at something concrete, and and you're pointing to it, so you're anchoring something in an image kind of thing, and then you're supplying the word in the context of that, and you point to it both when it's being pointed out and when you're paraphrasing. So it reinforces, this is what you're talking about. It's this thing that's the palette. And that these are the primary colors. And that this is...
Sometimes I have students who want to know what the right answer is. How do you deal with that?
Well, what's sort of interesting is that over the course of this conversation, sort of one right answer did come up. And I asked her, how does she know that it was Kerry James Marshall who painted this? And she said she had seen this painting in an exhibition of his and sort of could identify it as such kind of thing. So that's so information does come out about this. Information, this paint by numbers. So if people didn't know that, it's there. So the question is sort of, what was Kerry James Marshall thinking? What would be the right answer there? What was his intention with this thing? Does he tell us?
Well, I gotta say, can I add something?
Oh, please.
I haven't read a lot about this piece, but just coincidentally, I started to set this up. But I think that a historian, a curator, would be thrilled to have heard that conversation. So as far as what is the right answer, we were steeped in that.
You know, it's an interesting thing because people have been taught that there's a right answer to everything. And, that's running straight through the grades. And it's unfortunately true even in pre-kindergarten at this point. Sort of kids are already, and it's a terrible, terrible thing to be doing to people. Because, honestly, there are so few things that really have one definitive right answer. But even when there is a right answer, or a right answer for now, or a right answer for me, it isn't necessarily going to stay the same sort of thing. And that sort of, what I think is that when we teach people to be flexible, by giving them something that is ambiguous to begin with, where there really isn't a right answer, it's sort of where intentionally there's no right answer. That's one of the great things about art. The arts. There's no one right way to interpret anything. Yeah.
Within this discussion, the art teacher in me wanted to know, what's the title? Who did it? And there's this other textual information and contextual information that I feel like I would need to really understand it. And when I practice at BTS, because I'm still new at it, and I've been doing it for a long time, that it's really difficult sometimes to remember that it's not about answering the question and letting it end without telling them anymore. Because as teachers, we think that's what we're supposed to do.
No, I mean, it's a different paradigm for teaching than the one that convention has taught us is the right way to teach. Mm-hmm. And so we have to deal with that. And so, it's part of it is the restraint that it requires so you don't do the right answer thing. You don't give in to that sort of wanting to narrow something down when in fact, what I think was really great about this conversation is that we don't know. and that we were dealing with so many things about it, sort of, and we got to stuff that's tough. It's sort of race is one of those charged conversations in our culture, and we're not having enough conversations about it, kind of thing. And we have to, if we're ever going to really become post-racial. There are two ways we're going to get there. One is mixed race breeding, as I call it. And I fortunately have 2 grandchildren who are great examples, and it's wonderful. But in any case, the other way is through conversation. It's sort of as we get to know each other, kind of thing. But one thing, sort of, if we can break ourselves as teachers, if we can break our students of the notion that they always have to be able to put something in a package at the end of it, end of any exercise or anything. We get to the point where we can think that sort of, let's say you can believe in your God and I can believe in my God and we're both okay. And that's a really big deal. Just think about the conflicts in this world that are somehow about that kind of question. And saying, you're wrong, I'm going to cut off your head. Literally. So, we've got to get beyond that. And the way we're going to do it is being able to think flexibly. So, sort of, the impulse to teach in a traditional way is there, and it's hard to get over. And the reasons for it are also understood by us, kind of thing, because there are some things that are better thought of in a way that's right or wrong. A lot of math. There's a lot of phenomenological things. It's either raining or it's not. It's not kind of raining. It's sort of, but the fact is that more is, there is such a thing as kind of raining? Yeah. It's called California. Yeah. Yes, I don't know what I'm talking about because it happened yesterday morning in LA, really. Okay, so, all right, we making progress here? I was wanting to take this. I'm not necessarily wanting to, but thinking maybe it would be a good idea to sort of take this into the arena of defining visual literacy a little bit, because it's sort of, I think, at the bottom of what we're after, it really has something to do with visual literacy. That means that sort of a capacity to sort of make sense out of what one sees, kind of thing. But it's an interesting thing that sort of when you watch any 3 or 4-year-old explore the world, they are perfectly clear that they can make sense out of what they see. And they're doing it all the time, kind of thing. It may not be the same sense that you or I might make, and it may not even be right, but they're doing it. They're confident about it. But when they get to be 35 years old, they have a master's degree in whatever, they're practicing lawyers in New York City, kind of thing, and they come to MoMA and they think they don't know shit. Well, what's gone wrong? And part of it's school. I mean, a lot of it is sort of, I think there's a couple things. One is that sort of we forget that that the visual strength that kids have when they're young is very, very powerful, and that we don't continue to use it after the point where illustrations are as much a part of the storytelling as text. As soon as there really is an opportunity to sort of switch to text, we're there. Because of this incredible pressure to read. But what we lose at the same time is just think about sort of how, not every book is like this, but sort of, really great illustration in books. But I mean, a lot of them are popular books and simple books like Goodnight Moon. The text is kind of nothing. But the rooms are full of great things to look at, kind of thing. And if we just read Goodnight Moon and don't spend time looking at the images, or Madeline, or Eloise, or Maurice Sendak. They're great pictures, and sort of, the stories are terrific, and they're fun, but they're not all there is. The nuance and the detail and the additional stuff that's told through the pictures, to forget that that's, there is a mistake. But that said, when you get to the point where we don't understand how we're being manipulated by images, we're in trouble. And when we get to the point where we think we can't read something that is necessary for us to understand, like a lot of doctors with the different kinds of imaging systems that are available to them, or, by the way, their patient that's sitting in front of them, they no longer need know how to make observations about sort of exactly what constitutes normal versus not normal, how to make a description of that that really sort of allows someone else to sort of understand it, for you to really sort of penetrate it deeply. We're in trouble, and we're in trouble. Misdiagnosis in medicine is one of the biggest problems that doctors have. Carl Menninger, I think it was, who wrote a book, a memoir at the end of his life. He was considered one of the genius diagnosticians. Sort of, he was at the Mayo Clinic, and he sort of at the end of by autopsy, he said I was right 13% of the time. That's not a very good odd. What we're counting on is them to know what's wrong with us and to fix it. But 13% of the time, maybe. Anyway, so visual literacy. So the term, came into some kind of use in sort of beginning in 1968, sort of, and it was taken there by where Marva and I met, basically, sort of at a meeting of the International Visual Literacy Association. But in any case, sort of one of the things that I underlined that one line there because I sort of think that even beginning at the early part of discussing visual literacy, sort of the whole idea of it's developing set of skills. And this is really why what I want to not leave us with, I'm not quite there yet, but what I want us to think about is sort of this, that we're in a process. When we're talking about education, it's always a process. No matter who, no matter what level, it's a process. You're at a particular point, wherever you are, kind of thing. And if we think about it any other way than developmental, it came from somewhere, it's going somewhere. It may stop, but that doesn't mean it's the potential for more isn't there. Kind of thing. The minute we sort of take our eye off of the developmental possibilities, how change is possible. How many people think that they can change, or think that they can't, or that someone you're married to, well, it's like as soon as we think we're fixed, got a problem. So. Being able to sort of just constantly think about sort of where are we in the developmental arc of our students, of ourselves, and how can we sort of take it to the next step sort of thing. Sort of my little formula of sort of what is the challenge that's going to be right at this moment to sort of produce the next moment in the person's development. This is something that's come out of academia, really sort of a description of visual literacy kind of thing. And it's got a lot of good stuff that's in that kind of thing. And then working with a couple of other people, Dabney Haley, who's been working a lot with business lately and using BTS, and Alexa Miller, who has been working in the medical world very effectively for the last 6 or 8 years kind of thing. We came up with this sort of thing. But what I would think is that sort of these are steps in a developmental arc of trying to understand this business of visual literacy. Because we all think we understand terms like that in the same way we think we understand what critical thinking means. But the fact is that sort of if everyone sat down and sort of wrote a definition right now of visual literacy and or critical thinking, I suspect that we'd have a lot of different ideas, and some overlap and some not, kind of thing, but there wouldn't be any consistency. We used language as if we all understood exactly what it meant. And I think that sort of that's okay, because it's good, it's necessary to have some shorthand. But that said, when we lose track of what it is, what it does mean, when we aren't really trying very hard to deal with what it means, we're again in a sort of a situation where it's a bit of a stalemate. It's not only, it's intellectually specious, it's not interesting anymore, for us, really, sort of. So, but visual literacy can be attained that will allow us to sort of find what's inherent in this, and there's a lot, or this, or this, or this, seen maybe next to this, in a classroom in any case, where you can juxtapose images really easily, or next to this, or next to this, or loneliness, alienation, which I think this is painting's about. Mind you, it's probably a lot of other things, and in Picasso's mind, who knows? Grappling with the different emotions you sort of see in this grouping, because those expressions are not identical. They seem to be witnessing the same thing, but responding to it differently, but trying to get at the nuance of what one expression means over, as distinguished from another. Just move your eyes from one head to the next. Go start over on the left-hand side. And what do we learn from thinking about something like that? Or a more narrative situation? More story? Same theme, seems to me. Trying to read and understand emotion, but it's conveyed differently. I want to end this part of so we get to just questions and whatever, with VTSing this. So this is a text, obviously. In fact, it's a poem. And so it's a slightly different thing. It requires that we are able to read and to make sense of words. We don't have an image in the same concrete way as we do. But meaning making can happen in the same way, kind of thing. So here's how I've experienced this being done. Sort of projecting this. Also, if it's with young people, giving them a copy of this so that they can write on it. So they're asked to read it, and then anybody in the room can read it aloud, or the teacher can read it aloud. Maybe twice, and then begin talking about what's going on in this poem. And either what did you see or what did you read that makes you say that? Or what more can you find? So let's do it. Anybody want to read it aloud? Yes?
Love after love. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door, in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit. Feast on your life.
Thank you. What's going on here? Yes.
I think it has a bit of a religious aspect to it because I know with communion you break bread and you drink wine, but it also kind of, after hearing it being read aloud, I feel like there's a lot of aspects of yourself, like meeting with yourself and finding love for yourself.
All right, so two thoughts upon reading it, sort of in one shifted when you heard it read, but sort of there's thinking that it may have a religious meaning because give wine, give bread, as in communion. But then sort of when you heard it, you thought it's somehow about yourself kind of thing, and sort of because of all the references to yourself kind of thing that sort of kind of are woven into this and throughout this piece. Okay, good. What more can you find? Yep.
It seems like someone's recovering from being dumped. I say that because love after love, someone's been rejected and they're making peace with themselves despite someone rejecting them because they see, sorry, I have to that it's, you have to go back to the person who you know you are on the inside, that maybe that other person didn't see, that stranger who's been there, who's loved you all along, who is yourself.
All right, good. So thinking that this, sort of finding a narrative in this that has to do with, and thinking about the meaning of that first line, thinking that sort of someone's been dumped. Something has happened, and so much of the poem is sort of about trying to reestablish yourself, trying to find yourself, and love yourself, even though you may have been scarred or bruised by someone else's rejection or something like that. Okay, good. What more can you find? Yes? And
well, sort of adding,
sorry.
Adding on to that is maybe within the relationship you had given up a lot of yourself, and so you're kind of getting to know yourself again and welcoming yourself back. And then the wine and the bread, I'm not 100% sure about this, but is that for forgiveness? Do you get your sins forgiven? Is it saying, is it referencing like forgiving yourself?
All right, so we're going to have a little confirmation class here.
Yeah.
But you were sort of, what did you see that made you sort of think about the process of trying to, what's involved in reclaiming yourself?
Well, I guess the elation, the word, so you're happy to greet yourself again. So I guess I was thinking about that and kind of getting to know yourself again.
And I think you actually used the word welcome. Right? Was that you? Yeah. It's referred to that way. So it's sort of, so tipping off the language that's sort of in this first stanza, sort of to think about sort of how that when you do, if you do go through this process of rediscovering yourself, it can be done with pleasure. You can welcome yourself. There can be some elation in it, kind of thing, sort of thing. But then they're curious about sort of what's going on in communion, sort of what is it that. So if you give wine, give bread, what does it do for you? Anybody know the answer to that?
I'm a recovering Catholic, so the idea of take up my body, and so it's a literal taking back of the self into yourself by consuming. Metaphorically, although if you're Catholic, it's also literally consuming back the body of Christ. And so the stranger who was yourself, so that recognition perhaps of the divine within yourself.
Okay, good. So in Catholic tradition, sort of in a few others, the Eucharist sort of has to do with sort of the body and the blood of Jesus, kind of thing, and sort of taking them. They are given corporal form, sort of, with wine and bread, sort of. But you're taking it and you're connecting it to this line here, where.
Yeah, though my reading of it, I'm trying to remember that poem, A Jug of Wine, A Loaf of Bread, and Thou, which is a love poem. And it's an invitation to the beloved to sit down and have wine, have bread. I can't remember is it Browning?
Sure it is.
What is it?
Either that or Rumi. So we're not sure who made that line, but in any case, it seemed to be sort of the notion of sort of a love affair being sort of having something to do with a loaf of bread and some wine, kind of thing, and sort of thinking about you will love yourself as a stranger. Sort of thinking that in this case, what this might have to do with is reclaiming yourself in your own body and blood, and with doing it with love, and the result is more love, maybe something like that. Okay, what more can we find? Yes?
I listened to it, the way it was beautifully read, the way it sounded. It went back and forth, almost like if we're thinking about love, I automatically think about a heart. I also think about the word life. And if you look at the way the poem is actually written and you look at it to the side, it almost looks like vital signs along with it.
So maybe understand the vital signs.
Like on a heart monitor, for example.
aha, okay, good, like this might be a cardiograph of some sort, sort of thing, sort of thinking about how this might be someone's chart, but sort of thinking about, particularly when you were listening to it, it's sort of the rhythm of it.
Yeah, it had a beautiful rhythm to it, the way it was read.
It was beautifully read.
Thank you.
Are you a poet? Just know how to read poetry?
Theater teacher.
Theater. Oh. God bless you. So, but sort of thinking that sort of because of the way you read it, sort of it took the rhythmic thing sort of, and the whole notion about the heart that's at the center of this somehow kind of sort of took graphic form for you, kind of thing. Okay, good. What more can we find? I think you actually may, and then.
I thought it was first about death and reconciling oneself upon death.
So, although we started off with the notion that it had to do with maybe sort of having been dumped after a relationship, you're thinking it might have had to do with that. That was your kind of association. What did you read that made you say death?
Well, I think maybe when I first saw greet yourself at your own door, something about a death store. And then this further discussion about taking communion, maybe last rites or something. I don't know, there's something about making peace with oneself that seems to happen.
Right, so another context for this was sort of not reclaiming yourself from, let's say, the heartbreak of a relationship that went bad, but sort of thinking about at end of life kind of the rights. Pardon? So establishing a relationship with oneself at the end of life kind of thing, sort of just thinking about it is more about mortality than about the end of a relationship. Okay, good. What more can we find?
I just saw progression of time. I saw progression of time, but almost the idea of coming full circle, where, and I kind of see the self-love, how as children we're, so self-centered and egocentric, and then because that one line that says, to the stranger who has loved you your whole life, it's almost like in loving someone else, you lost touch with, or the person loses touch with themselves, but they come back. I don't see any real evidence there that whoever that other was, whom you ignored for another. I don't know that that person is necessarily left, but the idea that for a time that caused you to not focus on yourself, but then, as you grow older or as time moves on, you kind of come full circles. Your focus is not so much on that, but turning back in on yourself and learning to love yourself.
Okay, sort of thinking about it sort of as it's having to do with the cycle of life. That sort of there is self-love at the beginning, sort of the egocentrism that's sort of natural to kids, necessary, and so on and so forth, and sort of maybe losing that at some point.
For possibly romantic love.
For possibly a romantic relationship.
The idea of the mirror is, sort of emphasizes that loving oneself.
So the mirror is used, to give you the opportunity to sort of see yourself and love yourself, kind of thing. It makes a graphic kind of thing. But it's more less about, let's say, a dramatic break of death, but about just something that can happen over the course of time. Is that you can lose yourself and your self-love, and that it's. But you can also find it and come back to it. Okay, good. What more can we find? Yes.
I was just looking at the structure, and that we've got 5 lines, then 7 lines, then 3 lines. Very intentionally split, so it's almost haiku-like, but I don't think that's exactly what a haiku is. But yeah, just where it's split is very interesting, and I don't know why. But for welcome, and then to break, we're not done with the sentence, but we have a break there. And then similarly down there from bookshelf to the sentence isn't over, but we're breaking.
Right. So knowing haiku is the example, sort of knowing that there's form to poetry kind of thing. That there are ways, sort of things that are done intentionally. You're just noticing the line breaks and thinking that you're just calling our attention to them, kind of thing. But how this line in this stanza sort of ends with a comma kind of thing, and then the sentence sort of carries on and then ends there. It seems like just wondering about sort of what kind of thinking that might be behind the pattern that's created by the way it's actually laid out. Okay, good. What more can we find?
Near the end, I was just thinking a little bit of teenage angst, like when it says the love letters from the bookshelf and the desperate notes, like when you felt everything so deeply and probably a little too much. Right? I think the author is maybe saying, you know, come back to that where you felt so much for yourself. Maybe just not that much. But
All right, so just coming down here to this language about the desperate notes, sort of thinking that there's a period in one's life, and it's often got something to do with high school, where there's that sense of desperation that sort of comes from loving someone and maybe wondering if they love you back and all of that kind of thing, but sort of thinking that that your last thought was
just that, you know, you felt so deeply at that age, and then like they're saying come back and feel those emotions, just like maybe not so.
Okay, good. So bringing you back to the emotions, but not necessarily the desperation. All right, so sort of thinking about it in a more positive way in some respects than the way much of our conversation has been. Okay, good. What more can we find?
I guess I'm thinking about the way that I'm being directed to feel when I'm reading this. And I feel a sense of loneliness and a kind of depression. And I connect that. I kind of see where you're going with the heartache, but I don't think that it's about another person. Like, I think about all of these directions that we're being given, like to eat, to give, to sit, to feast. Like, we have all of these verbs that we're being told to do. And I think about, like, who is the kind of person that doesn't already do that, that needs to be directed to do those things? And I would think it would be a really depressed person, a very lonely person, whose kind of natural inclination isn't to already be that way to themselves, of all people, right? So that's like what I'm seeing in that.
All right, good. So less of a narrative and more of an encapsulation of sort of how the depressed person might need to be reminded of something that sort of, you know, it's just like you sit, you know, it's like when you need a reminder to sit and feast on your life kind of thing, something's gone wrong. And it's not necessarily about a relationship, it's just maybe that state that some people get to, and maybe many of us, at least at different times, kind of thing. Okay, what more can we find?
The thing that, I mean, I feel like there's a sad tone to this poem too, and the line that starts it for me is, the time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror. So there's this future tense. So this is something that is going to happen to you. So either you're in a relationship now and it's going to end, or, I mean, all relationships come to an end. I'm thinking of this song, it's a salsa song, like, todo tiene un final, like everything comes to an end. And so that's what I feel like is like either, no matter what, there is going to be something after this love relationship ends, either because the person dies or because it fizzles out. Whatever happens, there's going to be this time when you reconnect with yourself. But at the end, the other thing is, take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes, peel your own image from the mirror, sit, feast on your life. That's still part of you. All of those things that you're taking down are the memories that you have from that relationship. So yes, you're getting back in touch with yourself, but that relationship was also part of you. So it's fine to sit down and remember all of those things, those notes that you wrote, the photographs you took. You're taking down the image from the mirror now, but you're connecting it to what has been on those shelves, and you're feasting on your life in its entirety.
All right, good. It sort of reminded of the comment that Mary made about cyclical nature, sort of thing, in a way that sort of, it's a sense, in the sense of that also was sort of reading some sadness into this kind of thing, but that the time will come. It hasn't come yet. We're talking about a future tense where that something is going to happen, that you are going to be able to do this thing, kind of thing. And when you try to get right down to the end, it's like, look at all the stuff that's part of your life, the desperate notes and everything, and sort of feast on it, kind of thing. The time will come when you can do that. Doesn't seem to be here yet. So that's the sad note. Okay, good. One last thought.
Mine was going to be, do you want me to read it with a different intention? Because...
Oh, the act person in her is about to emerge.
Well, no, because I mean, that's part of, then it goes away from the visual interpretation of it.
How about that? Shall we give her, yeah, please.
love after love. The time will come when, with elation, you will greet yourself arriving at your own door in your own mirror, and each will smile at the other's welcome and say, sit here, eat. You will love again the stranger who was yourself. Give wine, give bread, give back your heart to itself, to the stranger who has loved you all your life, whom you ignored for another, who knows you by heart. Take down the love letters from the bookshelf, the photographs, the desperate notes. Peel your own image from the mirror. Sit, feast on your life.
Bravo! No, I mean...
I just mean that, you know, the intent has...
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's isn't it? Enough said? But that's great.
What I was going to say was that I could have written this poem about 3 weeks ago. I remember standing in front of the mirror and thinking, the person that's inside does not match the person that you see. You're getting older, you ate too much, you don't
Oh, stop that.
And you know, you do it at all different kinds of times in your life. But there, my mom died this year, there was just a lot of stuff that when I looked in the mirror that day, I thought, oh my gosh, so as I read the poem, that is why I left, because it really got me. And so therefore, I totally believe that it's about one person. And it really is about how we meet ourselves in the middle somewhere and figure out who we used to be and how that relates to who we are now and who we're going to be. So stop for a minute, take all your stuff, your reflection, the stuff you've written, the stuff you eat, and a good glass of wine, and hang out with yourself for a while and figure out where you're going. That's how I hear it.
Very good. So we've created a narrative out of it. We talked about teenage years. We've sort of we've related to death, to depression, to bruises that come from relationships, kind of things. Sort of, but over the course of it, sort of a variety of things have sort of come out that have to do with the fullness of life. Now, that's the problem when you summarize, is that there were so many, it's like, please, don't do that. All right, so what kind of questions might you have about sort of this? I mean, sort of some of them have emerged, like what do you do about right answers and the need to get it in both into your head as well as in your class's head. That there's some things that aren't about right answers. And there's some times when right answers are sort of irrelevant.
In all your years of practicing this, what has been the most satisfying outcome?
It's a really interesting thing, but sort of one thing is that sort of how different the same picture can be in different circumstances. That's one insight that's been sort of, but it's so common, it's almost become, you know, like, yeah, so. No, what is really is, I honestly believe that what we've done today, together, collectively, none of us could have done by ourselves. Yeah, there are teachers playing a key role in it, kind of thing, but it's really, someone once told me this, sort of watching, this was actually at Kansas City's sort of the card company, Hallmark, has a big art collection. Sort of the curator asked me to come and do VTS with sort of about the art collection. So we did. It was a lunchtime thing. It was oversold. There were lots of people, and after the event was over, sort of one of the men who worked in the company, sort of went up to the curator and said, "I hope you're not paying that guy anything." And she said, "Why?" And she said, and I don't think they were, by the way. She said, "Well, we did all the work." but you know, sort of. But that said, it's sort of we all did all the work here today, kind of thing, and that is, and it's amazing to have that kind of experience, sort of where we were really talking about serious things with a level playing field, with nobody being right, nobody being wrong, nobody. I don't know if any of you felt intimidated, and I mean, there may have been, you may not have been, your interest might not have been piqued, you may not have wanted to say anything, but that said, were you afraid of saying something? Yeah, because you didn't say anything.
No,
so
I didn't. No, I wasn't afraid. I just liked listening to what other people were saying.
was anybody afraid?
I had a moment when I was talking about, you know, the color of her skin. I didn't want it to be a racial remark. I was looking at it as strictly just the black color in comparison. So I was.
And I think you made that clear.
If it came across the wrong way.
No, I think you introduced the subject, which is great, because some people won't even say that. You can have a conversation and nobody gets to that point. But that said, you didn't put it in the context of a racial discussion that came out more later. So, and I tried to reflect that. I hope I did. I mean, I'm not sure what I did, really. Pardon?
No, I didn't feel that. You did not make me feel that way. It felt
Okay.
very safe. The way you responded to my comment made me feel very safe.
I mean, that's the point.
I think that you're touching on the fact that it builds community and ensemble in a lovely way, creating that safe environment for people to explore, and also enhances our empathetic skills as we listen to each other and build on those ideas and those 21st century skills that we're working as a team.
Very hard things to teach, by the way. How do you teach listening?
Phenomenal.
How do you teach empathy? You know, how do you teach caring? Well, yes, but it's also by demonstrating it and making it appeal, not by listen to me, or you're not treating that child empathetic. So it's not rules, it's example and opportunity. It's sort of you give people something to listen to, and an example of how you listen, and people think, oh, I see. They don't necessarily say that. They don't know they say, but that happens. It's what happens. So, so so what's been the richest thing is when we have these kinds of experiences where we are talking about things that matter together. We didn't know each other, and yet we've shared some serious thoughts on life and I think what happens from that is that it's how we feed our spirits. That's why the relationship has been so long with religion and music, and because when we have ideas in combination with feelings, we feed our spirits. If we indulge, if we sit, feast.
I just wanted to say that what seems to happen, and I've seen it happen often, is that when we start a BTS discussion, the first comments tend to be about concrete things, and the neutrality of the paraphraser makes it's like a safe environment is created, so the more interpretive comments tend to happen near the end, and by that time there is a community. It's like that dynamic builds.
And I think that sort of in order to get to the point where you actually have empathy being demonstrated, where you have the ideas being shared that are deep and go beyond sort of the beginning ideas, which aren't necessarily superficial, but they may be on the surface. Sort of to give time, you have to have time to get to stuff that's deeper, and that's what's sort of so often missing from so much. So when I said that we saw growth after 10 hours, after 20 hours, and substantial growth with young people in elementary school kind of thing, it doesn't take a huge amount of time. That's not much. You can find 10 hours over the course of a year easily. That's one of the reasons why we created it, BTS, as a set of short experiences. Rather than, let's say, a whole curriculum that needed to be taught week after week after week kind of thing. Because so much can happen when you have that level playing field, that opportunity, the right subject matter, and so on. When people are encouraged to sort of be themselves within the community. Anyway. Any final questions for me? Yes.
So this actually came up while in our discussion in our breakout group, but I'm wondering if in your time doing BTS you've ever applied it to teaching like art making?
Well, this did come up in our small group too, kind of thing, where it can be used in a way as a critique methodology,
Okay.
sort of what's going on in your picture. And then I've tried this. What did you do to make that happen? I don't know if anybody else has this.
Yeah, I've done that before. We teach photo, so it lends itself very
It's
well to
perfect,
critique.
yeah. I mean, sort of you've got, I mean, sort of the quick turnaround and the success that you can have in capturing something. Sort of, it's like, it's not always what you did,
Right.
it's what happened.
Right.
But nevertheless, you know, sort of when you're talking about someone else's work, it's sort of assigning the authorship and giving them the chance to sort of, what did you do to make that happen? And what more can you say about your stuff? It's sort of, it's so much better than sort of saying, well, you're grayscale, you know.
Yeah.
You know, So I critique is only useful if it teaches someone else how to be thoughtful about their own work.
So true. Yeah.
You know, when you're not in the room and you're counted on for whatever. What I think every bit of teaching should be about is enabling people to do something on their own. And what you want to do is help them get there, kind of thing. So whether if it's a critique that's involved, you want them to be able to reflect on their own work from the standpoint of, you know, did I accomplish what I wanted to? And what could I do differently if I didn't? And how could I build on that if I did? Where do I go next?
That seems like a beautiful spot to stop. That was perfect. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marva.
So helpful for not only newbies, but I've been doing it a long time and I learned a lot today. So I appreciate that and coming at it from multiple perspectives. I'll be different when I do it next time.
Me too. Thank you.